Hello, everybody. I'm Alejandro Fernandez, and today I'm going to present to you this research report called History in the English Classroom, an opportunity to critically analyze our society. Now, I'm going to present to you the agenda. First, I'm going to start with the objective. Then, I'm going to present to you the theory, the methodology, the findings, and finally, the conclusions. So, the objective of this research was to analyze how 8th and ninth semester students interpret some historical events from a critical perspective in an English course at Universidad Santiago de Cali. Now, in the part of the theory, I'm going to address two key axes, which are first, the intercultural view of language learning, and second, the section of critical pedagogy. In what concerns the critical view of language learning, we have to understand that according to this perspective of language learning and teaching, there is a close relationship between language and culture. Therefore, language is understood as an element which is embedded within culture and vice versa, which means that we cannot learn languages without learning about culture, and we cannot learn about culture leaving aside the language. Some authors like Cramsch, Liricot, and Scarino have proposed and have followed this perspective. Additionally, in order to address an intercultural view of language learning, we need to be aware of the attitudes of openness and tolerance. This means that when we analyze an intercultural view of language learning, we need to be open, curious, and tolerant, and we need to accept others. And we need to engage in intercultural interactions with positive attitudes and with the desire to know deeply about the other person. In the same way, an intercultural view of language learning requires knowledge about the others, knowledge about the language, the history, the literature, the symbols, the practices, the rituals, and the meanings within all those social practices. In the same way, an intercultural view of language learning requires that we develop skills to interact and understand others. And finally, an intercultural view of language learning, particularly in what concerns Byram's model, proposes that this view should go beyond just knowing the other and accepting the other. And it proposes that a critical view be developed. In this sense, Byram, in his ICC model, proposed a skill called critical cultural awareness, which is related to a critical view that the learner develops in which this person takes a particular stance based on solid criteria which allows him or her to, to define his or her position towards cultural documents or events. Now, in what concerns the critical view of language learning and education, I'm going to focus on the ideas that come from Freire, Kinchelo, and Kumarabadivelu. Among them, in order to address a critical view of education and language learning, we need to understand first that there are several relations of power, and those relations of power affect the way people behave and also affect the way people have access to benefits, to privilege, and to certain advantages in life. In the same way, being aware of those relations of power gives us consciousness of social issues. That is to say that when we acknowledge that there are certain relations of power, we are aware of the different problems in the society, such as inequality, discrimination, violence, and all those elements that are in our society and that make damage to all of us. In the same way, according to this critical view of education, education is seen as a tool that can help us overcome all those social issues and which leads us to the final part, which is social change. And social change here is understood as the ultimate goal of education. Therefore, according to the critical view of education, the objective, the raison d'etre of pedagogy, it is to achieve social change, social transformation through the educative practices. Now, I'm going to explain to you the methodology. And this was a qualitative classroom research in which I used three instruments such as journals, surveys, and interviews. All data were analyzed through content analysis following the steps of immersion, creation of categories, coding, and presenting the final big patterns in the students' voices. The context was this research was developed at a private university, Universidad Santiago de Cali, in the program of the BA in Foreign Languages, English and French. And this study was carried out in the first semester of 2019. The participants were students of the course of Anglophone Culture and Civilization. They were 21 students whose ages ranged between 19 and 31 years old, and most of them belong to the middle class. All of them are BA students, and some of them are already teachers, and most of them are pre-service teachers. Now, in the design of the class, we had three key sections, units, sorry. In the first one, we analyzed the history and the generalities about English language. In the second unit, we analyzed the phenomenon of colonialism and identity. And finally, in the third unit, we analyzed the social issues and the role of education in solving all those problems. Now, I'm going to quickly address six of the most important activities that we developed in this research. In the first activity, which I took somebody to speak about the capture of the Justice Palace, that event that shaped Colombian history on November the 6th, 1985, was a key event that shaped, transformed, and even shocked our country. For that reason, I had the opportunity to take one of the soldiers who participated in this event, and he went to our class and he talked to my students in order to allow them to be aware of the social issues, the practices, and the meaning, and the meaning of this event for Colombia's recent history. I decided to do this activity because if students are not aware of their own social issues, of their own cultural and national history, they could be prone to have to not properly understand the forces behind history that move around them. And therefore, if they don't understand their own culture, their own history, how are they going to understand another culture, history, or the history of the United States, England, or Australia? For that reason, we decided to do this activity. And this activity, as we are going to see later, proved to be one of the most shocking activities and one of the most meaningful activities for them. In the second activity, I decided to disguise as a French soldier, and we had this storytelling show in which I took a musician with me, and I told the students the story of the Battle of Waterloo, but from the French perspective. Because usually we have been told about the British version of the battle, how the British won the battle, how Napoleon was seen as a criminal, as a butcher, as a murderer. But some of us in this place of the world have been exposed to a different perspective. So, in order to explore different alternatives and different views about this particular historical event, I decided to immerse the students into this French version of the event. Now, there were other two different activities. And the third activity was about writing an essay, but in a particular way. So the students had to go around the university, chase some clues, but the first clue was a video that I showed them. In that day, I was not in the classroom. I left the students a video, and in the video, in the style of the movie Mission Impossible, I told the students the instructions for the activity. So they started chasing and looking around the university for the different clues, and the clues were different articles about different social issues. So the students chose a particular social issue, and based on that social issue, they decided to chase for particular clues and articles. And after doing all that job, they had to sit down and write an essay, an argumentative essay about the particular social issue they chose. Following the order of these social issues, there was a fourth activity called the Fair of Social Issues. In that activity, the students prepared tiny stands about social issues: racism, gender violence, discrimination, political violence, and some of them which were discussed in the class. And the students prepared some stands, and in those stands, the students defined the social issue, presented the features of that social issue, the manifestations, and a relationship between education and that social issue. Finally, the students proposed some pieces of advice in order to defeat that social issue, and in order to get close their audience to the social problems and the role of education in the solution of those social issues. Particularly in this activity, the students presented their stands presentations, yeah, not with their classmates, but to students from other courses, so they could get a direct approach with non, yeah, not common, with people who don't belong to their everyday background. Additionally, we had a similar activity, which was micro lessons with a critical focus. And in this activity, the students prepared tiny English lessons, but from an intercultural and a critical approach. This means that the students had to prepare, yeah, of course, communicative activities, but they also discussed some topics about culture, about social issues, and all of that within an English class. The students went to different classes, and they shared their activities with students from lower levels lower levels. And finally, we closed the semester studying World War II. In this activity, we played a kind of risk in which I explained to the students how World War II was developed, which were the movements of the troops, and through the use of tiny toys, figures, and paper dolls and planes, the students could understand a little bit about the movement, the military operations, and of course the political, social, and cultural world of World War II. Now, these activities could allow the students to get three key ideas. First, that there are different perspectives about historical events. Second, that those different perspectives lead to myths and half truths. And finally, that the teachers have a paramount role in the promotion of critically aware individuals. So these are the key findings, and this is the order in which I'm going to present those results. So first, regarding the different perspectives about diverse historical events, one of the students mentioned this in the journal. He said about Philippines, there was a controversial event that had two versions: the Battle of Manila in 1945 during the World War II. In this campaign, one part said that Japanese forces killed and destroyed Manila, but the other one said that American forces did it. So it can be said that we have to hear different versions in order to establish a conclusion, because sometimes we only hear one part of the history. So basically, in this excerpt, the student says that, yeah, is acknowledging that for several episodes in history, there are more than one version. And this is one example: the Battle of Manila. The Americans say the Japanese army destroyed the city. The Japanese army said that the Americans were the ones who destroyed it. And it is this is one of the key implications of analyzing history. And this is one of the key findings that the students could reflect about, because they were able to understand that history is not one single linear line, that it is a multifaceted phenomenon which evolves and which crosses with several interpretations of the events. Furthermore, this led students to identify some myths and half-truths in the findings. So in one of the surveys, I asked the students, among all the historical events discussed in class, which one caught your attention the most and why? So one student said, La toma del Palacio de Justicia. And he also says, the truth always shocks. To know that everything is not the way that it was told is that was said, sorry, is really significant. There are going to be lots of perspectives of the same story, and the event taught me to think twice before taking something for sure or granted. So, by the way, this excerpts that I'm showing here are the students' exact words, and they were not changed. Now, in this part, we can see that usually the different perspectives of history could lead to the creation of half-truths, myths, or wrong ideas about what used to happen or to what happened in the previous historical events. Particularly here, this student is mentioning that the that some of them had a prior idea about the meaning of the capture of the Justice Palace, and that based on those previous ideas, those not complete ideas, they are aware that those historical events, and from a critical perspective, are prone to be changed, manipulated, and biased. For that reason, when the students were aware that there are different perspectives, that some of them create myths and wrong ideas, they are aware to know this, that to know whether everything is not the way that it was said is significant. In other words, these activities could lead students to interpret history from a different perspective, and also to know that sometimes what we have been told is not really what happened. Following this order, in the survey, I also asked the students this question: what is the view that media, history books, and teachers promote about historical events, and why? So this student said, if we talk about media and some history books, we can say that the view they want to promote is a false view, edited by them to make people believe in what they say and avoiding analysis because it is better that people do not know the truth. On the other hand, if we talk about teachers, we can't say that all of them teach a false view. Some prefer to let the students know the truth instead of following systems. So it is interesting because here this student is not just discussing that, yeah, on the one hand, we have some sources that do not tell history as it should be told, but this student is also saying that some teachers, I mean, that there are two groups of teachers, if we can say that. And one group of those teachers mm, could follow a not very critical perspective of history and probably unwillingly are teaching students myths and false views. But there are other teachers, according to what this student says, that prefer to allow students go deeper, digging deeper in order to know different perspectives and to get a closer idea to what really happened in history. Now, being aware of those myths and half-truths led students to reflect about the roles of teachers in the promotion of critically aware individuals. So this student said, people are conformist. So if you have at home a TV, internet, or you listen to the radio, those are things to entertain. They are not truly informative things, and obviously there are powerful governments that only want to spread certain information. That's why institutions should promote reading and critical thinking. So these students could identify the relationship between a critical perspective of history, cultures, and education in the transformation of society. Because she's saying that, well, sometimes the media are not really informing, and the media is not usually based on critical foundations that allow people to think and to know what they should really know. However, and she also acknowledges that some governments and some powerful groups do not want the truth to be known. For that reason, and she now is making the connection between the critical view, the current situation of things, and also education, because she says that that's why institutions should promote reading and critical thinking in order to knowing more about events, in order to developing a closer and more complete perspective, and in order to know according to solid criteria, a perspective that in order to develop the personal perspective about those events. Now, another student in the journal wrote, I think my role in the transformation of the society is to provide tools to my students within the classes that generate critical thinking about other cultures, respecting them and their own. So basically, this student is telling that she has the duty to go through the lessons, to transform the society, and to help the students reflect about what is really happening in the society, in the cultures, in order, but based on a perspective of equality and fraternity that allows the inclusion of others. Now, in conclusions, we can say that students understood that there are different perspectives about historical events. Second, the interpretation of historical events led to myths and half truths. And teachers and education must engage in social transformation by critically analyzing information. Now, this can be summarized in a short reflection because language teaching, culture, and history have a key role in the development of critically aware citizens. With the recent events in Colombia, with everything that is happening right now, more than ever, we as teachers have to be aware of the important and powerful role that we have in the students in order to guide them to think twice about what they have heard and in order to allow them to think by themselves and to create, shape, and transform the perspectives they have about their lives. So this is the end of the presentation. Thank you very much. All your glory to Jesus, and may the force be with you. Goodbye.